or the Civil War of 1980 to 1992, right? You recall that? In the email I sent you, there were 4 questions that I wanted you to prepare. That's the second part of your. So the first question has to do with land tenure processes in the 1880s, how that eventually leads to the 1980 Civil War. And again, what you're doing here is you're just making that causal link. Right? I'm not asking you to do a century's worth of descriptive analysis. Just want you to make that link of essentially how the land tenure process consolidated the land into the hands of a few elite, and how that essentially perpetuated into high-level violence, right? So that was one essay question I want you to prepare for. The second was to analyze and explain the impact of the United Fruit Company on the social, political, and economic environment in Honduras. If you recall, we talked about that at length, right? We talked about the penetration of the United Fruit Company and all facets of Honduran life. Certainly your textbook outlines that a bit more. I want you to be prepared to answer that question. The third was with respect to Guatemala's indigenous community, right? Go ahead and X that question. I will not ask you that question. Congratulations, that is a gift I'm giving to you for sticking around. So do not prepare question number 3, okay? No? Everybody clear?
Yes.
Okay. Question number 4 was describe Central America's most important political, economic, and security challenges. Okay, that's very straightforward. We talked about several throughout, the last few months, and I want you to be able to summarize to some degree what you feel are the most important challenges facing the state. Does that make sense? Okay, so that doesn't really help other than sort of explain a little bit about the essays. All the material is out there. I want stronger analysis. That's where you're going to get higher points. So don't cite historical, just historical facts. Put some level of analysis into your short 1 to 2 page response. Okay? And again, do not prepare for the third question. We'll X that. So 2 out of those 3 I will ask. Okay? Any questions on the essay questions?
What is the
Yes.
first one again?
The first one was land tenure processes and how that led to the 1980 Civil War in El Salvador. The second one is the impact of the United Fruit Company, unless you. And the third one to prepare for is the social, economic, and political challenges facing Central America. Did I answer the question that was here? Oh, you said 1 to 2 pages, right? I'm going to give you 2 pages blank to prepare. To write. You don't have to fill all 2 pages. Whatever it takes to get your point across. Okay? So it can be 1 page, it can be 3/4 of a page, it can be 2 pages.
Can you give us 2 pages
per question. Right.
I'm sorry, I missed it. Which 2 did you say were going to be on it?
I'm sorry? Yeah, no, that's very savvy. Okay. Any other questions that don't require me giving you all the answers? In the third question, so in the social economic, no, I want you to talk about the prevailing. There's some major things in Central America right now. We know what those major things are. We talked about it. Governance, right? Institutions, security, corruption. There are some prevailing things that I believe are tremendous challenges or impediments to the progression of Central America as a region. That's what I want you to articulate. Okay? All right. So going to the actual exam, one of the questions is going to pertain to the underlying cause of the 1969 soccer war. Right? We talked about that. You guys recall? We're talking about the conflict between Honduras and El Salvador. So we talked about the underlying cause. It wasn't necessarily soccer, although one could argue that it was timed around some pretty important World Cup qualifying matches taking place between the 2 countries. But that wasn't what really caused the outbreak of the conflict. So know that. In El Salvador, something very, very important occurred in 1932. Does anybody remember what that was?
Matanza.
The Matanza Massacre, right? The Matanza Massacre of 1932. This is very, very important. It's one of the important historical experiences that sort of shaped the political culture of El Salvador today. Know the causes that I detailed that led to the 1980 to 92 Civil War. Although that is one of your essay questions, that's also a question within the exam. I'm going to give you a list of various factors. You should know what those When we talked briefly about Guatemala, we talked about an event that occurred in 1954. Does anybody know what that event was?
1954?
1954, Guatemala. Yeah. So you might want to Google that. I'm sure it's a Wikipedia page, right? We're talking about the CIA coup, right? This was the second in the CIA's history of overthrowing governments. So we're talking about the 1954 coup that ousted Arbenz. Who colonized Belize?
UK.
Okay. Now,
Britain, UK. I don't know.
Britain, right? Remember Britain?
Yeah.
That country? It's way over there. They're the ones that colonized Belize. Remember, Belize didn't gain its independence in 1981. I sent you Friday, so Monday I wasn't here. We had a guest lecture. I sent you those slides in advance, so you already have his material.
I'm sorry, I have a question because it's a part of that. Is Belize part of the Commonwealth or not? Because I'm confused.
No, I mean it is a fully independent state. However, the Queen is still a figurehead. So I just gave you the answer to one. Belize's independence, right? 1981. Okay, so know when Belize gained its independence as a independent state. Okay, so we talked a little bit about who dominated the contemporary, at least in contemporary history, who dominated the political and economic environment in Honduras, right? So I think that was detailed in the notes, so make sure that you know who dominated that particular political and economic environment of Honduras. Of Honduras,
What?
yes. I think we said it, right? The United Fruit Company, we talked about that? Okay. Now, one of the things that Fred should have talked about when he lectured on Belize on Monday was the culture of Belize, right? So it's interesting, though, because Belize's culture is far more, what? Caribbean, right? If you think about Belize, right, you think about the center of power in Belize, it's really around the Belizean Creole population, not the Latin or Mestizo population. Okay, so that's one. You want to understand where the dynamics of power is within Belize. The other important question pertaining to Belize is the change in demographics, right? Did he talk a little bit about the change in demographics? That Belize is becoming far more Latinized today. Over the last several decades, Belize went from having a majority Afro-Caribbean population to now a majority Mestizo population. That change in demographics is a trend. It continues and it will continue and will likely, potentially likely see some level of conflict between those two particular demographics. Okay? I talked about, or at least I didn't get into great detail about it, but I sent you a paper with respect to a major political event that happened in Honduras in 2009. Does anybody know what that was? So the ousting of President Manuel Zelaya. And on that note, we also talked about the return of some pretty important political figures in Honduras today, right? So, for example, Zelaya's wife is going to be running for the presidency in next year's elections. Zelaya himself is going to be running for Congress. So understand that dynamic, it returns, right, with respect to Honduran politics. What represents 40% of Guatemala's population? The indigenous community, right? So know that. What was the historical capital of Central America? Guatemala. The historical capital of Central America. Remember, what was the important part about that? Exceptionalism, right? Do you remember that political culture piece that we talked about, where I made some argument that Guatemalans view themselves as sort of exceptional within the Central American region? This goes far back to the period in which they dominated Central America. Well, that's that historical experience.
What was the comment right before? Guatemala is 40%
indigenous.
So you said that they don't consider themselves indigenous?
Right, they consider themselves largely Mayan. I mean, it's interesting. They're really synonymous, right? They mean the same thing, but they have a very specific Mayan identity, which is important. Honduras currently has territorial tensions with which countries?
El Salvador.
El Salvador is
Salvador,
one.
Nicaragua.
Who are the two most important political parties in El Salvador? The two most important political parties in El Salvador. Know who they are. We talked about them. Because I mentioned that in El Salvador, politics was incredibly divisive. One end you had one party, and on the other end you had the other party. So know who those two parties are. Yes?
Right before that, what was the name, sir? I'm sorry, before those two most important?
Know the current political, territorial disputes that Honduras has. Right? That's one of the historical important factors, right?
And
Is
it's
the
El
long
Salvador.
history of historical. I'm sorry?
And the territorial dispute is with El Salvador,
El Salvador and Nicaragua.
and Nicaragua.
And what's the one you just said after that?
After that was the important political parties of El Salvador, which are in the notes.
El
So you
FMLN,
have the FMLN on one side, right? What was the FMLN?
la guerrilla.
¿Cuáles son los políticos parties?
No, the FMLN was the insurgency,
Ya,
right?
de
You guys
guerrilla.
were shocked. FMLN was the insurgency that fought against the state for 12 years. Arena is the other party. But know those parties, and by the way, know who the FMLN was and who they are today. Yes?
Might be the accent. What was the other one? F whatever.
Arena.
No, it's 4 letters. The other one?
No, I get that one.
You get the FMLN.
Arena.
Yeah.
You talk, I didn't say Arepa, I said Arena.
You say arena?
A-R-E-N-A, yes. It's in the notes, by the way. I
Ya,
assure you, it's in the notes.
¿Cuál es?
Okay.
Arena y FML, cada uno
Yeah, like I
más.
have no idea.
Okay,
Arepa. Vamos a hambre.
so I also talked with respect to El Salvador. For basis, remember we're dealing with, for this exam, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize, right? And those are the 4 countries you're doing. So all the questions are going to come from those 4 countries. I talked about important concepts and understand the dynamics of El Salvador's violent history. So that's in the notes. Be sure that you know what those considerations are. So we talk about El Salvador having a violent history. There are some things that sort of that's predicated upon. So know what that is. That is in the notes. Okay, so we talked about the importance of Honduras during the Cold War, right? You remember that discussion? Mm-hmm. What was the importance of Honduras during the Cold War? You guys remember the discussion?
The proxies?
So, Honduras was large. Did Honduras have a formidable insurgency? No.
No.
Good. So this is like a refresher class, right?
Yeah,
the whole semester. So when we talked about, and I feel really embarrassed now. I did an awful job. So we're talking about Honduras.
You did a great job.
Thank you. That's not going to help you. We're talking about Honduras. And the question is, did Honduras have a formidable insurgency?
No.
Okay, who says yes?
Nicaragua had an El Salvador, but no Honduras.
But not in Honduras, right? That was one of the important things that we talked about, where for those of you, the 3 of you that were here that day, we talked about how that's one of those prevailing historical features. They never really had a major insurgency, never really had major civil war. That's what separated Honduras from the rest of its neighbors who during the 1980s was going through violent civil wars, right? So kind of know that. Also know the fact that the United States was largely leveraging Honduras, right, to fight proxy wars in other Central American countries. Right?
Yeah, they harbor the Contras over there.
Exactly. So the Contras was a primary, where the United States was supporting the Contras who were fighting in Nicaragua. We covered that in the first portion, right? Well, yeah, that really kind of, if you know those things, you will do well on the 25-question multiple choice exam.
Thank you.
Yeah, we covered all of the concepts. Does anybody have any questions?
serio.
Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta.
It is,
¿Cómo?
yeah, I can't look for that.
Maybe a question on that video you posted.
Video on Honduras?
Guerrilla formidable insurgente.
But if you know the video, then you know
Formidable
someone
insurgente.
failing, you know, yeah.